where we at? New Bloomfield, Pennsylvania, Tuesday, May 25th, 1880. Good people, good time. New Bloomfield, what up? Alright, this one is, like, without a doubt the funniest one that I have right now. I'll try not to laugh during it, but it's really funny. And I like to laugh, so get off of me. Let's do this. Scoot in here. Let's go over here. Let's go over here. Okay. Let's go back a little bit. Let's go back one more time. All right. Yeah. Okay. That inquisitive boy. The other day, a lady accompanied by her little boy boarded a train at Little Rock. The woman had a careworn expression hanging over her face like a tattered veil, and many of the rapid questions asked by the boy were answered by unconscious sighs. "Ma, that man's like a baby, ain't he?" said the boy, pointing at the bald-headed man sitting just in the front of them. "Hush." "Why must I hush?" After a few moments' silence. "Ma, what's the matter with that man's head?" "Hush, I tell you, he's bald." "What's bald?" "His head hasn't got any hair on it. Now hush." "Did it come off?" "I guess so." "Will mine come off?" "Sometime, maybe." "Then I'll be bald, won't I?" "Yes. Will you care?" "Don't ask so many questions." After another silence, the boy exclaimed, "Ma, look at that fly on that man's head. If you don't hush, I'll whip you when we get home. Look, there's another fly. Look at him fight. Look at him fight." "Madam," said the man, putting aside a newspaper and looking around, "what's the matter with that young hyena?" The woman blushed, stammered out something, and attempted to smooth back the boy's hair. "One fly, two fly, three flies," said the boy, innocently following with his eyes a basket of oranges carried by the newsboy. "Here, you young hedgehog," said the bald-headed man. "If you don't hush, I'll have the conductor put you off the train." The poor woman, not knowing what else to do, boxed the boy's ears and then gave him an orange so as to keep him from crying. "Ma, have I got red marks on my head?" "I will slap you again if you don't hush." "Mister," said the boy after a short silence, "does it hurt to be bald-headed?" "Youngster," said the man, "I'll give you a quarter now if you keep quiet." The boy promised, and the money was paid over. The man took up his paper and resumed his reading. "This is my bald-headed money," said the boy. "When I get bald-headed, I'm going to give money to boys. Mister, have all the bald-headed men got money like you?" The annoyed man threw down his paper, arose, and exclaimed, "Madam, hereafter when you travel, leave that young gorilla at home. Hereto, I always thought that the old prophet was very cruel for calling the she-bears to kill children for having sport of his head, but now I'm forced to believe that he did a Christian act. If your boy had been in the crowd, he would have died first. If I can't find another seat on this train, I'll ride on the cow-catcher rather than remain here." "The bald-headed man is gone," said the boy, and the woman leaned back and blew a tired sigh from her lips. Now, can't we all relate to that last sentence? Poor woman. But that kid's going places. And who is this guy? Why does he like to call kids animals so much? Hedgehog. Treasure Cave, a wrecked sailor's adventure on Pingyang Island. Pingyang. Oh, that's Pingyang over there. I don't know. I'm probably going to get canceled on my second freaking episode, but whatever. Stop being so sensitive, Pingyang. Alright. Well, let's go. Thanks for watching, everybody, too. And I did read that YouTube would rather you not, read off the publisher or the authors. So if I don't have it, it's kind of a good thing, I guess. I did post the first one and read the publisher and all that. It got passed. It's on there. So thank you for watching if you did. And if YouTube deletes one that I do state all of those things, well then we're going to Rumble, dude, and we're talking about whatever we want. All right, a treasure cave. And excuse me, obviously, I can't pronounce hardly anything. So Pingyang Island. I might say P Island. Who knows? We'll see. I might say other things. There's no telling. Okay. For 2 weeks, upon a certain occasion, I, Jack Tar, able seaman, belonging to the port of Plymouth, and having scarcely been taught to read and write, was worth my millions. I had more clear treasure under my hands than would have bought the Astors, the Goulds, and the Vanderbilts combined. It is a curious story, and though I can tell it only in plain, sailor-like fashion, it may be of interest. Man, the Vanderbilts, dog? Are you serious? He's hyping up. Let me go in a little bit more. Okay, hot, tight. Okay, the Straits of Malacca, as you all know, is that narrow body of water between the island of Sumatra and the Malaya Peninsula. Beyond are the Java Sea, the island of Java, and Borneo, and if you sail far enough, you will bring up at New Guinea. As you enter the straits from the northwest, you have Archen Head on the right, being the butt end of Sumatra, and Pinang Island on the left, this later lying off the Malay coast, and being for years the rendezvous of pirates. Up to the 1858 and 9, at which time British cruisers shelled this island so often and so vigorously as to kill off even the monkeys. From 500 to 1,000 Malay pirates lived on the Pinang and preyed on the commerce passing through the straits. They had a sort of government of their own, a fleet of 50 light craft, and they often sailed 100 miles out into the Indian Ocean in search of merchant vessels. In those days, nearly every merchant vessel carried an armament and extra men, and a tussle with pirates was counted on with as much certainty as a change of weather. Between 1855 and 1858, no less than 13 English vessels were captured within 50 miles of Pinang Island. Include in this list those taken from the Americans, French, and Germans, and the total number would be at least 25. In 1856, the pirates attacked a Russian corvette which had anchored in the straits to repair damages, and although she finally beat them off, it was only after a conflict in which she lost half her crew. They became so bold before that they were driven out that nothing was too big for them to attack, and they were utterly reckless as to danger. I didn't know they had corvettes that drove on water. Well, sirs, in the summer of 1855, I was a foremast hand on the Liverpool ship Castle, Grote, something like that, bound through the straits and beyond, and we came within sight of Atchin Head without having noted a suspicious craft. We had 6 cannon, plenty of small arms, and a full crew aboard, and for the last 2 days we had been ready for anything which might turn up. I can remember that we rather hoped for a scrimmage, for we knew what a murderous set they were and wanted revenge. But it was the opinion of the officers that we should go through without a shot. The pirate fleet seemed to be away on some expedition, and the best glasses abroad failed to make out anything of a suspicious character. We came up with the Atchin Head about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the wind all at once died away. The tide was against us. The ship was allowed to drive over within a mile of Pinang Island before being brought up with the anchor on a sort of middle ground, which gave the iron a good hold in 5 fathoms. It was proposed to wait here for the tide to turn and for favoring breeze, as the channel was not then thoroughly surveyed. But in less than half an hour the clouds began to bank up, and it was seen that a storm was at hand. Just before sundown, we got it from dead ahead, and it came with great fury. The heaviest gale could not have kicked up much of a sea in that spot, as we had everything snug aloft. No one felt any uneasiness. 10 minutes after the storm struck us, and while everybody but the watch on deck was under shelter from the downpour of rain, I was ordered out on the jibboom to secure the flying jib, which had been carelessly stowed. I felt as safe as I do this moment sitting in my chair, but I had not yet performed my task when a sudden heave of her bows, accompanied by a shake to starboard and port, as if the ship was an angry horse, loosened by my hold and dropped me in the boiling sea. One can never tell how these things occur, but personal carelessness is at the is at the bottom of them. It was in the water before I realized that I had I was in the water before I realized that I had to let go my hold. It was raining and blowing tremendously hard, and if I cried out, which I had no recollection of doing, no one on deck heard it. I was swept away from the ship in an instant. Indeed, when I fought my head above the foam and sprang up in the water to look around, the rain and spray had hidden the ship from sight. Can you imagine being in the ocean, dude, by Pingyang Island, and dude, the sharks in the Corvettes just driving everywhere. I gotta stop talking in between. Okay. I had no doubt that I was driving straight out into the Indian Ocean, but I did not recall that I was frightened or in despair. Sailors take more close shaves than any other class of men in the world, and as a rule, they depend more on luck to bring them safely through. I turned on my back, being a good swimmer, shipped as little water as possible, and thanked my stars that the uproar had temporarily driven the sharks to deep water. In almost that very location, a year before, I had seen a shark of such dimensions alongside the ship that everyone on board had been called up to review the monster. His length was estimated at 35 feet, and he could have bitten a bullock in two at a snap. I fought off all thoughts of my peril, knowing that if I got rattled, I should soon go under, and in about half an hour, I felt sure that I had heard the noise of waves breaking on shore. It wasn't 5 minutes later when I was driven over a coral reef outside the Pingyang Islands, and in 5 minutes more was on the beach of the island itself. The last of the tide, aided by a current, had carried me to the pirates' headquarters instead of out into the ocean. The storm still held, making the afternoon as dark as evening, and though I had carefully husbanded my strength and had been in the water only half an hour, I crawled up beyond the run of the waves and lay on my back a long time before I could walk about. But that time of night had set in, and there was little danger of my being discovered unless I ran against somebody. At this point, the forest came down almost to the water's edge, and my first move was to get under cover. I had hardly moved back into the woods when I heard voices and knew that several men were patrolling the sands. Had I been 3 minutes later, they would have found me. The loss of a foremast hand to a ship with a full crew is of little consequence, nothing to be compared to the loss of a sky royal or a few fathoms of a new rope. In his case, he is logged as gone overboard, and his effects are sold at auction. In a week, he is forgotten, and the chances are that no one ever receives the back pay due him. If a sail is lost, the money to replace it comes out of the owner's pockets, and they may criticize the seamanship of the captain. Geez, I would be missed by the mate after a few minutes, and he would report that I had been shaken into the sea and drowned. No boat would be sent out after the storm abated, and no boat would coast Pingyang Island on the chance of my having reached it. The ship would proceed on her way as soon as possible, and whatever was done for me must be done by myself. They're just like, all right, hey, Gary, he fell over the side. Yeah. All right. Gary was cool. All right. I would just be like bawling. And one of my best friends, or just somebody, if I didn't even know the guy's name, I'd be like, we gotta turn around. We're gonna go get him at Pingyang. Okay. About 11 o'clock that night, the storm abated. The sky cleared up and a light wind came out of the northwest to help the ship on her way through the straits. I distinctly heard them weighing the anchor and put for fear of sharks would have swam out to her. She was too far off to make my voice heard, even had I dared to raise it. As soon as the rain and wind ceased, I heard voices plainly enough all around me, and a shout or two from me would certainly have resulted in my discovery. Bedraggled, chilly, and disconsolate, yeah. I wore the night away, and at the first signs of dawn, I crowded further back into the woods. The island today is mostly cleared, having been burned over several times, but at that date it was a solid forest. The tropical vegetation was needed by the pirates as a cover. They had erected several barracks and storehouses, and these were in a natural opening about half a mile below the spot where I was washed ashore. At that one spot was an opening in the reef with a natural harbor. Before moving, I looked for the ship and found her gone, and then I knew that I must depend solely upon myself to get out of the scrap. I went back into the dense woods for a mile before coming to a halt. There were parrots, monkeys, and snakes in plenty, and the vegetation was so dense that I could hardly penetrate it. I saw from the first that there was an abundance of wild fruits and coconuts, and in going the mile I came across 2 fine springs. No matter how many people there were in the island, I stood a good chance of escaping them as long as I held to the woods, for there were no beaten paths, and the tameness of the birds and monkeys was proof that they had not been much disturbed. The sun came out hot after a while and dried my clothes, and when I had picked up a breakfast, I sat down to plan. I had been through the strait several times, and I knew the narrowest part was at least 200 miles below me. There, opposite the island of the north coast of Sumatra, the straits were not over 20 miles wide, and the channel ran within 5 miles of the Malay coast. If I was to get off by way of a ship, I must find and steal a craft of some sort, and either put to sea or reach the mainland and follow the coast down. I, however, failed to settle fully on any plan, and finally went to sleep, and though the monkeys and parrots chattered in my ears and a dozen snakes may have crawled over me, I slept like a log for many hours, and I awoke to find the day nearly gone. I therefore hunted about for supper, hid myself away in a lot of vines, and put in another night. Next morning I had a narrow escape. I was moving about in search of breakfast, being now very sharp set, and had climbed a tree to get at some wild fruit, when I heard a person making his way through the forest, and soon thereafter a Malay passed directly beneath me. He's up in the tree. He was fancifully dressed, heavily armed, and without doubt one of the pirates. He was moving cautiously, but not like one in search of anybody, and after a minute I dismissed the fear which had arisen at sight of him. I had not been seen, and it was hardly possible that my presence on the island was suspected, as may be supposed. I kept very quiet until the fellow had passed out of hearing. What troubled me most was the fact that he disappeared in the direction I intended to take, thereby giving rise to the fear that there were settlements on both sides of me. However, after about an hour I headed down the island, and when I had gone a couple of miles and found no break in the forest, I was somewhat reassured. The country soon became very rough and stony, and although rid me of the thickets, I had to cross some ravines which tried my legs exceedingly. When I had crossed 2, I descended into a third, and as I seemed to trend to the east, which was very nearly my direction, I followed it instead of clambering out. At the bottom was a rivulet, which probably became a river after a long spell of wet weather. I kept a sharp look around me, but there was not the slightest evidence that anyone had ever passed that way before. After a walk of a half a mile, the ravine bore off to the left, and I selected a spot to climb out. It was right among the thick bushes, in order that the noise I should make would frighten away any lurking serpents, and I had drawn myself up about 15 feet when a boulder on which I stepped sunk under my feet into the earth, and as I went over backward I heard a smothered yell from the earth. I was terribly scared for a moment, and as I picked myself up I listened for a minute or two to see if the sounds would be repeated. All was quiet. However, I seized a bush and pulled myself up to where the stone had sunk. There was a hole in the earth as large as a bushel basket, and I saw that a cave of some sort existed below. It took 5 minutes of looking around to find it, as the mouth was crumbling, hidden by vines, but as soon as I found it, I knew that human beings had been there. It was a hole about 25 feet long, and at the spot where the cave was, it was 25 feet high. I could enter the mouth only on hands and knees, and I did not go far in until the light which came down assured me that it was vacant. And yet it was not. As I creeped in to where the rock had crashed through, I found that it had fallen upon a man, the big boulder. Very probably the native I had been seeing early in the morning. He had been sitting down, and the big stone had fallen upon his head and crushed him out of shape. The yell I heard was his death cry. I was ready to crawl out and take to my heels as I made this discovery, but another detained me. The fall of rock and dirt had knocked over a torch which the man had lighted, and now a bit of flame flared up all of a sudden to show me that the cave contained boxes and baskets. I dug out the torch below, blew up the flame, and became dumb with astonishment. It was a treasure cave. The receptacle of the pirates' plunder, all of their treasure. He found the cave, and he killed that guy with a boulder on his head, and it squished him. I have been told by Malayas who may have been Pyongyang pirates that under the rules which bound these rascals together, a treasurer was chosen for every gang. Everything of value was turned over to him to care for, and once in about every 2 years he made a division of the spoils. This treasure had to be zealously guarded, and in this instance it was so carefully hidden that no one but the treasurer could have found it. He had come in advance of me to add fresh plunder to the great store, and there were jewels in his hands as he lay there, a bloody mass. Man. Some of you may doubt what I'm going to tell you, but there is an abundant proof in the Royal Museum, in the old files of the times, and yet in my own possession. The treasures of that cave amounted to millions upon millions of dollars. It must have been the bank of 1,000 pirates, and it had probably been several years since a division was made. Many of the baskets and boxes were of European make, but there were many of native manufacture. The pirates had not stored away silks and velvets and laces. They had no such common stuff as that. The treasure consisted of money, watches, diamonds, rings, bracelets, earrings, watch chains, charms, and whatever else could be called jewelry. There were crosses and badges and medals by the score, and no less than 6 jeweled hilts of swords. There were at least 50 gold chronometers, and I verily believe the number of gold watches would have reached 500. Unlettered and unlearned, and brought up to look on a $50 note as a fortune, I would not have believed that the world held so much money as I found here. There were English, American, French, German, Russian, Swedish, Belgian, and all other sorts of paper money, and gold and silver was heaped up until my eyes were ready to answer for hat pegs. Can you imagine finding this? I just bought a metal detector. Yeah. I did. These stories, do they get you? Okay, strange how human nature works. Before finding this wealth, and I would have given a year of my life to know that I could make the next 100 miles in safety. I had no sooner got my eyes on the great wealth than I began to figure on how I could keep every last shilling of it. I would not go without it. A quarter of an hour ago, I was alarmed at the slightest sound. Now I would have faced and fought the whole pirate gang. I never suspected I had such determination, or that I would care so much for money. It took me a good while to cool off and calm down, and then I found myself in favor of sticking right there. I was like 2 men arguing. There wasn't one chance in 1,000 of my getting off with 1/10 of the plunder, and to remain there was to invite discovery. Then the other chap, as it were, argued that I was a fool to leave such wealth behind, and that I had only to remain in the cave to be hidden from any search that the pirates might make. As a result, I stayed. There was fresh water at hand, plenty of wild fruits and around me, and the only unpleasant thing was the corpse. As soon as my mind was made up to stay, I pulled it out from under the stone and buried it in the bank as well as I could, with only a stick in my hands to work with. Well, that was nice. There was no alarm that day, but On the next day, I had no sooner eaten a hasty breakfast and returned to the cave than I heard men in the woods. From an hour after sunrise to sunset, the pirates were constantly coming and going through the ravine, calling to each other and to the missing man. It was the same for the next 3 days, and the hunt was giving up or extended far beyond me. They may have reasoned that the man had sailed away from the island, and I have no doubt that searching parties were started out by sea as well as by land. I had to lie quiet now, and during the 3 days I suffered much from hunger and thirst. I knew the fellows would not give up as long as there was any hope, and it was well that I was overcautious. On the 5th day, 100 or more of them were in the ravine for several hours, pulling down rocks, uprooting bushes, and passing so near the mouth of the cave that I held my breath. This minute's search satisfied them, and no one came near me again. It was 2 weeks to a day before I continued my journey. On the 2nd day after burying the body, I exhumed it and striped it of outside of its clothes, and when ready to go, I left my sailor togs behind me in place of them. After handling everything over and over again, I fought down my avarice and used judgment in determining what to take. I unset and took every 80 diamonds. Judgment in determining what to take, I unset and took every 80 diamonds, upward of 16,000 in English paper money and 2,000 in English and American gold, and little over 1,600 in French notes. The paper money was all bills of large denomination. I wanted to load myself down, but I had sense enough to realize the tramp before me. I could not, however, resist selecting 3 of the finest gold watches, one of which can to this day be seen in the Royal Museum at London. It is of French make, but has never been further identified. It was a terrible trip I undertook. For 6 days I lived on fruits and berries and was often without water, and in this time I did not make 10 miles in a straight line, being constantly alarmed and paying no heed to the compass points. On the 6th night, about midnight, I came to a beach in a settlement. It may have been the one near which I first landed, and probably was. After making sure that no one was about, I approached the beach, hunted out a canoe-like craft, which I thought I could manage with a paddle, and I launched it and put it out into the straits without raising an alarm. Wind and tide were both in my favor, and at sunrise next morning I was picked up by the Lord Nelson, an English ship inward bound, 15 miles below and off the island. 2 or 3 years later, when we had the pirates on the run, I headed a party to secure the rest of the treasure, but we found only an empty cave. Accident or research had at least revealed the storehouse to others. Wow. I haven't read that one in a while. I think I just read it when I found it, and I was like, yes. And then I bought a metal detector, I'm sure. But again, very fun story, right, guys? I would love to have people let their kids listen in on some of these. I think that's a very, kid-friendly. The squishing of the head, it's like, whatever. But maybe not your 4-year-old, but like 10, 11, 12, whatever. And they probably might just think I'm a dork and don't want to even look at me. But I don't blame them. But yeah, so I'm just kind of keeping down the treasure path right now, adventure path. This is the second video. At some point, I think I'm going to keep going down this like little adventure path. I've got a lot more stories, and then we'll kind of start like, laying in some of the lost civilizations and the first in America and, sunken continents. And then I also have I don't know what I'll call it. Well, I know what I'll call it, but it'll be a playlist that's called Nuts, NNUTS, Nothing New Under the Sun. And it'll be a bunch of articles that basically tell you that, nothing's new under the sun. Electric vehicles, yeah, in the 19th century, running on batteries, cryo tanks, holding dead people's bodies to, one day erect them again, stuff like that. And then in the beginning of the intro, you can see that railway that the subway railway. I think that was in. I want to say it was in England, and it was one of the expositions, the World Fair expositions. It might have been Paris, but and that, my friends, we're gonna go down that rabbit hole too, the World Fairs, because there's some interesting things there, and we learned about it. I remember us learning about the Chicago World Fair, and that it all, before the fair happened, all of Chicago burned down. Because why? Can you think? Can you remember? Because a cow kicked a lantern over. Yeah. And then it just burnt the whole city. So, and then they had to rebuild it. And they rebuilt it so extravagant. I mean, it looks like, horse and buggy, just, I don't know if they could have done it. But they did. No power tools. So we'll get into that. We'll get into it. I don't want to deter too many people quite yet, but we got some fun stuff ahead. Thank you all for watching. Please subscribe, like, comment, then subscribe again. Okay? And then my TikTok is in the comments below. This is weird saying. And then my Instagram is too. But I don't ever look at it. But anyways, love y'all. Live in love. Peace.